Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live took an unexpected turn when legendary actor Harrison Ford walked off set after a heated exchange with host Jimmy Kimmel over Hollywood politics and cancel culture. From the moment Ford stepped onto the set, the energy felt noticeably tense. The 81-year-old icon, best known for portraying Han Solo and Indiana Jones, carried himself with his usual composed demeanor. Yet there was a look in his eyes suggesting this would be more than a routine promotional appearance. Kimmel, sporting his usual smile, welcomed Ford to the stage to thunderous applause. Harrison Ford, everyone, the man, the myth, the legend, he announced with his signature late-night enthusiasm. Ford took his seat with quiet confidence, acknowledging the audience with a modest nod before turning his attention to Kimmel. The conversation began smoothly, covering Ford's latest film, some humorous stories from set, and a few familiar mentions of his on-set injuries. But as the discussion progressed, Kimmel steered it into more contentious territory. "You've been in this industry for over 5 decades, Kimmel began. "You've seen Hollywood evolve. What's your take on how the industry handles controversial figures today?" Ford's expression changed subtly. His jaw tightened just enough to signal discomfort. "What exactly do you mean by that, Jimmy?" Kimmel leaned back slightly, his smile turning more deliberate. "We've seen actors face consequences for things they've said or done. Some call it accountability, others call it cancel culture. You've always been direct with your political views. Do you ever worry about saying something that might be taken the wrong way?" There was a pause. Ford's hands gripped the armrests just a little tighter. "I believe people should be able to voice their opinions without fearing that their careers will be destroyed by public outrage," he answered cautiously. Kimmel raised an eyebrow. "So you think some of these consequences aren't deserved? In some cases, the allegations are quite serious." "I'm speaking to the principle," Ford said, his gravelly voice steady but firm. "There's a difference between holding someone accountable for real misconduct and ruining their livelihood over an unpopular opinion or a mistake from years ago." The studio, previously lively with laughter, became noticeably quiet. Audience members shifted in their seats as the mood changed. Kimmel continued undeterred. "But don't public figures, especially celebrities, have a responsibility to be mindful of their words, especially on sensitive issues?" Ford's eyes narrowed. "Mindful by whose standard? Yours? A trending hashtag? A corporate policy?" His voice remained calm, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "I've been around long enough to see fads come and go, and I've seen good people get taken down by hysteria. I wouldn't call it hysteria when people are held accountable for hate speech," Kimmel shot back, his tone sharpening. "When someone uses their platform to push harmful views, there should be consequences." The tension was now unmistakable. Crew members exchanged glances, and producers in the control room were likely considering a commercial break. Ford leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on Kimmel. "And who decides what qualifies as hate speech, Jimmy? You? Executives? An algorithm written by coders in Silicon Valley?" He paused. "Or maybe late-night hosts who believe they're moral arbiters?" The words struck hard. Kimmel's smile flickered, then faded. "I think most reasonable people can recognize hate speech when they hear it. This isn't a debate about philosophy. It's about basic decency." "Basic decency," Ford repeated, his tone cool. "A convenient phrase, broad enough to suit whatever message you want to send." The audience was completely still now. This was no longer typical late-night banter. It had become raw, real, and televised. Trying to regain control, Kimmel said, "I think we can agree that racism, sexism, and bigotry are wrong. When public figures promote those views, they should be held accountable. That's not controversial." "There it is again," Ford cut in. "You define the terms of the discussion to fit your own view." Kimmel's composure began to falter. "I'm not defining anything, Harrison. I'm saying harmful behavior has consequences. That's how society functions. Society, Ford said with a dry laugh. Or just the version of society that lives in gated communities and gets its opinions from cable news and social media. That hit a nerve. Kimmel's tone turned confrontational. Coming from someone who's made a career out of playing heroes with no consequences, maybe the real world's just more complicated than your movies. Don't talk to me about complexity, Ford snapped. And don't act like your job is anything more than scripted commentary packaged as moral guidance. Scripted? Kimmel raised his voice. I'm trying to discuss real issues. Maybe that's uncomfortable for someone who's spent decades hiding behind roles. The studio air was electric, every camera trained on the two men. Audience members began to reach for their phones before security intervened. Ford stood slowly, his frame casting a shadow across the desk. You think I hide? At least I admit when I'm playing a role. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. Kimmel remained seated but leaned forward. What's that supposed to mean? You sit behind that desk acting like a judge. But you're just another entertainer craving applause, Ford replied. You reduce real issues into applause lines and punchlines. That's not bravery, it's convenience. I create division? Kimmel's voice cracked. I'm not defending hate speech. I'm calling it out. Ford's hands clenched. That's your trick. Label disagreement as hate. Shut down discussion by turning critics into villains. The crowd was stunned, entranced, yet visibly uncomfortable. Kimmel stood, matching Ford's stance. Maybe some people deserve to be called out, Harrison. If someone spreads views that dehumanize others, they lose the right to polite conversation. And who made you judge and jury? Ford fired back. When did talk show hosts start deciding who's employable? We're not banning people, Kimmel replied, but his voice lacked certainty. We're choosing not to amplify hate. Hate? Or just dissent? Ford asked, laughing bitterly. Anyone who challenges your worldview gets silenced. That's not justice. That's control. The tension peaked. They stood across from each other like rivals in a standoff. The lighting sharpened the scene, making it feel almost cinematic. Maybe you just don't like being challenged, Kimmel said, red-faced. Maybe you're upset because people are finally being held accountable. Accountability, Ford repeated. Funny how that only goes one way. Funny how it only applies when people step out of line from your script. My script? Kimmel's voice rose. I'm talking about rights, basic decency. If you can't see that, don't lecture me about human rights, Ford interrupted, voice low and firm. I've lived through events you've only read about online. What you call activism is just performance. Kimmel flushed. Performance? I speak up for people who don't have a voice. What do? Hide behind movie roles? Silent. Ford's voice boomed. I've fought battles you'll never understand. Off screen. And I didn't do it for applause. The studio was silent except for faint producer whispers and the hum of live cameras. Security hovered just off stage. Kimmel, struggling to regain control, tried again. Spare me. The war stories. You think doing your own stunts makes you morally superior? You're just another Hollywood star angry that the world has changed. Ford stood still, then quietly. Privileged Hollywood elite. That's your dismissal tactic. Label someone and ignore their perspective. Kimmel pressed on. You've made millions pretending to be heroes. Maybe it's time you confronted the damage your silence enables. Ford trembled. Not from fear, but fury. Let's talk about privilege, Jimmy. You sit here judging people, dismantling reputations with edited clips and jokes, and you're never held accountable. I do face consequences, Kimmel snapped. I get threats and harassment for standing up to hate. My people, Ford echoed. There it is. Everyone who disagrees with you is them. You can't accept that decent people can think differently. This was no longer an interview. It was an ideological clash. Different perspectives? Kimmel sneered. That's what we're calling racism and sexism now? Ford stepped closer. You throw words around like they're weapons, but I'm not afraid of being labeled anymore. Maybe you should be, Kimmel warned. Maybe defending harmful views should come with consequences. Ford's gaze burned. Is that a threat, Jimmy? On live TV? I'm saying words matter. Maybe it's time you realize that. Ford's laugh was hollow. Words from someone who's never faced anything tougher than an angry tweet. You don't know what real consequences are? The studio held its breath. Kimmel, flailing, went for one last angle. I think the public deserves to know what kind of person you are. Then tell them, Ford replied coldly. You're out of touch. You defend discrimination because it doesn't affect you. You're part of the problem. Ford took a breath. Old Hollywood, you mean? The one that told stories, not preached ideologies. The one that respected audiences. Kimmel tried to respond, but Ford cut him off. Old Hollywood gave you this. Stage. It built this industry. And it knew something you've forgotten. Entertainment is a privilege, not a platform for indoctrination. The room was transfixed. I've spent my life earning the audience's trust, risking myself for authenticity. I treat people with dignity, even if we disagree. Kimmel tried to interrupt. I'm not done, Ford said firmly. I don't destroy others to feel superior. I don't confuse disagreement with evil. Real strength builds. It doesn't tear down. Kimmel looked lost, his earlier fire extinguished. You want to know the difference between us? Ford continued, stepping in close. When I leave here, I'll sleep just fine, knowing I've lived with integrity. Can you say the same? Kimmel couldn't answer. I thought not. Ford straightened his jacket. I came here to promote a movie. Instead, I got a glimpse into modern entertainment, and I don't like what I saw. He turned to the audience. I'm sorry you had to see this. You came for entertainment, not a lecture on discourse. The problem isn't disagreement. It's mistaking celebrity for wisdom. The room remained silent, every eye on Ford as he walked off the set, leaving behind one of the most unforgettable moments in late-night history. This wasn't scripted television. It was genuine human drama playing out live. Ford turned to Kimmel one last time. Jimmy, I hope you come to understand the difference between holding someone accountable and tearing them down. I hope you realize real courage isn't taking shots at people who can't fight back. It's being able to admit when you're wrong. With that, Ford headed for the exit, his footsteps echoing through the now silent studio. Kimmel finally spoke, calling after him with urgency. Harrison, wait! We can fix this! Ford stopped at the edge of the stage, turning with a look of deep disappointment. No, Jimmy, we can't. Fixing it would mean you'd have to listen, and you've forgotten how. The iconic actor disappeared. Backstage, leaving behind a stunned studio and a host who looked like he'd been blindsided. Kimmel stood motionless behind his desk, his mouth opening and closing without sound as he tried to grasp what had just unfolded. The audience began to stir, first murmurs, then chatter, and finally a buzz of energy as the full weight of what they'd witnessed set in. They had just seen one of Hollywood's most revered figures deliver a quiet but powerful lesson in grace under pressure, while at the same time watching a talk show host's credibility unravel live on air. Security stepped in to restore order, but the moment had already landed. Despite attempts to confiscate recordings, phone footage spread online within minutes. In a matter of hours, the exchange was trending across the globe. Within days, Kimmel's ratings nosedived as viewers turned away from what many now viewed as spiteful activism masquerading as entertainment. The event marked a turning point, igniting national conversations about the role of celebrities in political commentary and the line between accountability and character attacks. For Harrison Ford, it stood as a final clear statement of the principles that had shaped his distinguished career. For Jimmy Kimmel, it became a tough reminder of the difference between exercising influence and earning respect. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out in animated discussion, one thing was certain. They had witnessed a moment of television history. Just not the kind Hollywood is eager to celebrate.